All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and dive in. We're excited to have one of our champion mentors join us tonight. If you didn't get a chance to join us as part of orientation or hear from Vincent, Vincent joined us this past start of the school year for our fall orientation. And for lack of better words, was pretty electric. We had some amazing words of wisdom from Vincent. He was able to share quite a bit of knowledge and just talk about his journey, which was just truly amazing. And it was such a good piece of feedback that came from our families that there was a multiple requests that came in that said, "Hey, can we please hear from Vincent again?" And so that said, I'm going to actually turn it to Vincent for just a moment in case you guys haven't had a chance to hear about his background a little bit. Vincent, if you want, why don't you take the next minute or two, introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background before we dive into some questions.
Sure, Dayton. Thanks so much for having me again. And hey, everyone, welcome to tonight's webinar. Really happy to be back with all of you. Had a blast talking to you a few months ago the first time, and thank you so much for all the positive feedback. I saw the all the comments and the questions that you submitted. I was really touched by some of the kind words and just the general interest and enthusiasm you all showed. So thank you so much. Um, if for those of you who don't know, my name is Vincent Zhou. I'm a Team USA figure skater. I've been skating for over 16 years, 17 years. I am an Olympic gold medalist, multiple time world medalist, national medalist. I think I think the list, the list does go on, but I'll cut it short there. Um, but I mean, that's only like the tip of the iceberg, right? We're here to talk about how do we get you there? What's the whole mountain of work and dedication and sacrifice and mindfulness and everything that it takes to get to that point, right? And that's the value that I hope to provide to each of you. I'm also a student at Brown University right now. I'm a senior. I have less than a year left in my studies before I'm going to start working and so I'm going through a transitional phase in my life right now, as I imagine many of you were when you made the huge commitment to make sports a bigger part of your life. So also here to provide any guidance that I can on the balancing act between the two and making a transition and having multiple aspects of your character, right? So yeah, that's a little bit more about me, and let's get into it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Vincent, so much for that background. And again, like I mentioned before, it was such a treat to have you as part of orientation, and you are a big part in the background. Vincent is a little bit kind in the way of saying he's busy, and that's probably putting it very kindly because Vincent has a lot going on, and so for him to, in essence, step away, spend some time with us, it's always a treat. It's always a joy. Again, the words that he shares are something that are kind of incomparable to what we've heard in the past, and so we really do appreciate it. So we're going to dive in a couple of questions, and again, I've put this in the chat, and also I'll put it in the Q&A as well. But if you guys have questions throughout the webinar tonight, please don't hesitate to place them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat as we're going through. And while we're going through some of the questions that we already had planned for Vincent, we'll also try and weave in some of the questions or comments that you may have. So, and if we get a chance to do a little open mic at the end, we definitely will. And we'll come off mute and let you guys all join in as well. So, Vincent, we're going to kind of go in a little bit different direction to start tonight. And, again, we're going to get into some of the subjects and topics that maybe you covered during orientation in case folks on the call didn't get a chance to hear you the first time. But I actually want to talk about personal brand a little bit. And we live in a little bit of a different day, different age, at this point, and personal brand has become a very big thing. You know, there are different ways to look at personal brand: name, image, likeness, NIL. That's a whole another topic of discussion, but a very prevalent and relevant thing that's going on. But as part of NIL, those that are maybe seeking or hoping to get a NIL deal or that are looking to continue to grow, whether that's just going into college or maybe professionally, personal brand is a pretty big thing. Can you spend a few minutes talking about why personal brand is important and kind of what it means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, this is something that I wish I knew more about earlier. So, I was born in 2000. I grew up as the internet evolved, as social media first became a thing. And I can't say I knew how to use it properly. I can't, you know, I have to admit I was pretty social media illiterate and NIL illiterate for a long time. And I probably made quite a few social faux pas along the way. And And here I'm still standing to talk about it, but uh I guess the advice that I have is ask yourself, what's the narrative I want people to know about me? Because here's the thing, what athletes, people who like kids who are, work really hard, put their heads down and just do the work. They're often extremely focused on their craft. They spend all their time just, trying to become the best version of themselves they can. But a lot of the times what they fail to realize is that other people don't see all of that. Other people don't see the character that you've built behind the scenes. They only see you in your few minutes in front of the camera, and they judge you based off of that. Whereas you judge yourself based off of, your subjective experience, everything that you've done. But how do you communicate that to others, right? How does that come across to others? And it can be easy to, get caught in the trap of everything's about me. This is my social media account. I'm here to talk about myself. And it's social media is about connectivity. It's about community. And my advice is to really lean into that aspect. When you talk about your journey, your struggles, the hardships you're overcoming, the hard work you're doing, the joy in your victories, think about how can I do this in a way that involves the community? How does this relate to my followers? In what role did my followers play in supporting me up to this point? It's not just about this is what I did to get to this point. Again, it's a difficult trap to avoid because being an athlete, you get used, especially an elite athlete, you get used to having an ecosystem of a support ecosystem around you. Everything is about you. You have coaches that are there for you, parents that are there for you, doctors that are there for you, trainers that are there for you, psychologists, nutritionists, the list goes on and on. It takes a village, and everyone is there to serve your needs. But on social media, you have to remember that you're part of a community and what you accomplish, the hard work that you do would not be possible without your supporters. And so just lean into that, be kind, be empathetic, be open-minded, be welcoming. That's the best advice I have for your personal brand on social media.
I love that. I mean, you hit on multiple key elements there, obviously focused on, again, personal brand as a whole, but what are some of those, leading elements that help you build that personal brand? And as we were going into that question, one of the things you started within your intro was character. And as you know, Vincent, we spent a little bit of time talking about character last time. And that was one of the things that when you and I first met, I was just so impressed with your character, who you are, your upbringing, your background, which again, we'll get into that a little bit because I don't think everyone has had a chance to hear that. But from a character standpoint, let's talk about that a little bit. Figure skating in particular. How has skating helped shape your character outside of the sport? Not necessarily inside the sport, but outside the sport.
Well, that's a very deep question, and there's a million ways in which figure skating, or more generally being an athlete, has shaped me outside of a sport. I was always really inspired by the word Olympian. What does being an Olympian entail? How does an Olympian carry themselves? And ever since my dream of making the Olympic team started to seem more of a reality, I immediately started striving to carry myself more like an Olympian. What does that mean? That means with dignity, with integrity, with accountability, being a good sportsman, exhibiting sportsmanship towards all my competitors and teammates, and always working hard, staying humble, and carrying myself appropriately. I've always strived to do that ever since like I said, ever since I felt like making the Olympic team really started to become tangible. That started to enter my forefront, and that also sort of ties into name NIL, which we just covered. Um, but in terms of character outside the sport, you know, I, I've never really been able to uh, I fear that sometimes makes me seem too professional or too uptight almost, but I'm sort of afraid to let go of that image of integrity that pops in my head every time I think about the word Olympian or like elite athlete, you know. It's just there's a certain air that comes with that. But I really strive to have a balance between that and just being an honest human being and not being afraid to be vulnerable with people and to connect with people, trying to understand them and empathize with them better. There's something so powerful about being honest and vulnerable with people and being able to connect with them better. And the other thing I'll say about character and what figure skating has taught me about it is that I've gone through so much hardship throughout my career, been through multiple times where, I felt like my dream was just ripped away from me. I've quit skating multiple times, given up on my dreams multiple times, and here I am, still standing to tell the tale. I've been through surgeries and major injuries and depression and failure and a world crashing down and everything. And, you know, all of it has really made for a story that's even more worth telling and, taught me more lessons about the world than just simply hearing about it ever could. I really think that people only learn the hard way and that you have to experience it for yourself. I can sit here and yap all I want about these things, but in each of your journeys, each of you listening, in each of your journeys, you're going to go through times that seem unimaginably hard, challenges that seem insurmountable. You're going to fail, you're going to fall, you're going to miss over and over and over again. And none of that the actual act or occurrence of failure doesn't matter. What matters is the way that you carry yourself through that, the character that you hold yourself to through all of that, because that will outlast any hard times, any hardship that you'll ever have to go through. And that's honestly the best advice I have on that.
Well, you touched on obviously a number of things, Vincent, which again, you talked about, the failures, the challenges. You mentioned personal depression, the hardships, and that it's not, one of the things that Kirk and I like to talk about, and Kirk references this a lot, is it's not just that perfect kind of hockey stick where everything's going up. You have your down times too. And those downtimes you talked about, obviously you tied it back to character. And I think there's another aspect which is very important within the athletic world. And even if you're not an athlete, but you are someone that's passion focused, it's the mental side of it as well. Because those elements you just hit on, those can be pretty mentally draining and they can take a toll in certain ways. And you, like you said, you just alluded to it a little bit from a, even talking about failure or depression standpoint. So that said, I'd love for you to talk about, again, as you went into a competition, what was your mindset before you would step onto the ice for a major competition? How did you get yourself mentally prepared? What were you thinking about? What were you doing?
Well, I've always had this blind, almost stupid belief in the good outcome, the good ending. I've always, and I think I have to thank my mom for this. This is something my mom has always had for me, and it's brought a certain spirit to the way we face the world together that has always made me feel invincible in a way. And I hope each of you thank your parents for all they do for you. Tell them you love them because they make so many sacrifices for you. You may not realize it now. And in a way, I'm speaking to myself 10 years ago. Um, but yeah, they do everything for you. Um, so yeah, that's the preface. But sorry, can you remind me of the original question? I just got really sentimental thinking about my
No,
parents.
you're totally good. We know how much from orientation your mom meant to you, and obviously, again, allowed you to pursue the journey that you ultimately pursued. And so, again, we I would love to dive into that more. But yeah, the question was just around mindset. What was your mindset like before you stepped onto the ice? How did you get yourself prepared?
Yeah, so like I said, I've always had this blind, almost stupid belief in myself. But on top of that, you know, I I trained so hard the with the intent of, you know, my mom had this saying. It was in training, beat yourself, and in competition, be yourself. So in training, I would always push myself and try to be better. Good isn't good enough. I have to, I have to strive to find the limit, find the boundary, and be willing to step outside it in training. And in competition, that's when that's when it's time to just cruise and show off the work you've done. That's when you get to, if you've done the work, then in competition, you can just cruise because you will have prepared for it. I would do all these my we would call them adversity trainings. I would train under all different sorts of circumstances. So my coaches and I would brainstorm all the possible scenarios that I could compete under. Let's say I'm extremely jet lagged. Okay, let's wake up at 5 a.m. and do a competition simulation then. Or let's rent ice at 10:30 p.m. and do a simulation then. Like we've done it at all hours of the day.
Mhm.
Or let's say your equipment breaks and you have to play with brand new equipment. So I've done competition simulations on completely different pairs of skates, switching to new pairs of skates and just going. Yeah, we've done competition simulations under all different sorts of circumstances so that when I actually get to competition, it feels like a piece of cake because I've done this before. There's a certain confidence, a certain comfort you find in knowing that you've prepared for prepared for that. But even if you haven't prepared for that, right? Because there's always like life is always going to throw those twists and turns at you. You're always at some point you're going to come face to face with something which you just have no idea how to tackle. And and when it comes down to that, my best advice is stay focused on what you can control, your technique, your breathing, how present you stay in the moment. These are all things that transcend, singular sports. This is across all sports. Focus on your breathing, stay present, stay open-minded to the possibility that things might go well. Know that you don't have to be perfect, you just have to be good and yeah, those are some of the most powerful things that I told myself before major competitions.
I love that. So many good tools there for obviously our students to use, and even myself and our parents to be able to use as well, just as we walk into our daily lives, just that kind of mental preparation piece. I'm going to stay in the mental space one more question, and then I'll rotate to a question that's coming from one of our students. But let's talk about the downtimes for a moment, Vincent. When you talk about the tough times, whether it is, a moment of sadness or depression, whether it is a failure, you know, how do you respond during those times? What do you do to pick yourself back up? How do you move forward when, in essence, the goal, the expectation wasn't met? Talk to us a little bit about that.
I think this is a really difficult question because the hard times are so personal and so unique for every single circumstance and every individual. But I drawing from the examples of the most difficult times I've been through, um, for me, I talked about this almost blind faith in the light at the end of the tunnel that I would there's multiple ways to think about it. You could frame it as an undying passion, an undying love for the sport, for what you do. You could frame it as stubbornness. You could frame it as grit. No matter how you frame it, it's just you have to know that if you have the chance to try, if like I've always believed if I have the chance to try, I'll never regret taking that chance.
Mhm.
And that's served me well so many times. It isn't always going to result in success, but that's okay because at least you won't regret not trying. Because I always knew I would never be able to forgive myself for giving up when I needed it the most. And the best example I can raise on that is, I mean, I talked about this during the original orientation, but if you weren't there, I'll just briefly, I guess, run through it again. In the 2022 Olympics, after I competed in the team event, the day before the individual event, I tested positive for COVID, and the next morning I I woke up, you know, ready to go, ready to, realize my childhood dreams. And then slowly I realized like I'm in a quarantine room. I'm not where I'm supposed to be. And my dream just sort of like fell apart in front of my eyes there. And I watched as, all my competitors lived out my dream. And I was just sitting there helpless on an isolation bed in a hotel far away from the Olympic Village. And after I returned home from the Olympics, I was just, completely devastated. No matter how hard I tried physically, I mentally could not, coordinate my body to do anything on the ice. And the World Championships were coming up in 5 or 6 weeks, and I had the choice to withdraw. And my mom, who, I've already talked about, she's always had that faith in me. She's never she's never allowed me to give up. She's never truly given up on me. And even she told me, "Hey Vincent, it's okay if you withdraw. I understand. I understand if you want to withdraw." And I've never heard her say words like that before. And that was either the completely wrong thing or the completely right thing to tell me, because that almost like snapped me into like a holy crap, that's not normal. Like, what do you mean I can withdraw? No, I can't. And so in that moment, I was like, I can't withdraw. I would never let myself live past the fact that I willingly chose to accept defeat. And so, after weeks and weeks of just completely being destroyed, not being able to do anything, not really training, not doing anything, I showed up to Worlds and won my final world medal before going off to school and ending my career there. Um, to me, that's just, you can call it confirmation bias. I like to think that it's just, proof of the fact. But um, you got, if you have the shot, you got to take it.
Well, I love that story every time you tell it because again, it goes back to you were at in essence, what you felt like the peak of your career, everything you'd ever trained for, dreamed of, you were there. And like you said, like it was just ripped away from you in a moment's notice. And you had a couple of paths that you could have gone down. Not that there weren't some dark moments during that time, but to your point, and with obviously the inspiration of your mom, you picked yourself off the mat and you found a way to proceed, and it ultimately led to something pretty amazing. So, thanks for, of course, sharing that perspective. I do want to dive into one of our students' questions, if you don't mind. And so I'll read
Sure.
it for you and kind of let you think about the question. So one of our students has asked, for achieving your goals, what do you do if you feel like you don't have enough time? For example, college is a time limit, and especially during teenage years, you really have to get to a good enough base, both skill and ranking. So the question is really about for achieving those goals, what do you do if you just feel like you don't have enough time?
Yeah, well, I would say break down the time you do have into smaller chunks and try and set tangible milestones, tangible goals for each of those smaller time chunks. You'll be surprised how fast you progress. An example I have of this is in 2020, I just come off an extremely difficult semester at school where I was trying to train and do school at the same time, and it didn't end up working out. I actually did end up quitting skating during that semester because I thought like I can't do this anymore. I'm going to focus on school. And after a miracle turn of events, some people very close to me convinced me to give skating another shot, but as a fresh start in a different place. And I love them and I trust them. I took them up on it and moved to Toronto after the semester ended. I started skating again. I had 2 weeks until the US championships after months of no training. And once again, you know, I had the option not to compete, but I chose to take the shot. And and I must have like that fire, that inner competitor in me because I went and I won a medal when I was prepared to not even, be top 10. And then and then this is the part that's relevant to the question. After the nationals, I was named to the world team, and I had again 5 or 6 weeks until the world championships, and I was nowhere near in shape. I wasn't I thought okay, my performance at nationals, I think that was a fluke. I like that was some magic. Now I feel like I'm back to square one again, and I gotta like well, I mean, even so what I did at nationals was it's not like what I did at nationals was what I wanted to do at Worlds. It was like what I did was nationals was great, but it was nowhere near where I wanted to be to get to Worlds. So so my coach and I broke down the 5 to 6 weeks into week by week blocks where every single week we set an ambitious but reasonable goal, an ambitious but reasonable goal for that week. And bit by bit, I progressed. And before I knew it, I found myself like I was like, holy crap, like I'm actually making progress. I actually feel like I have a chance at Worlds. And I think that was just a mind-blowing thing for me because before that, I had been so used to setting this huge goal for myself and just measuring every bit of progress against that huge goal and not having any other reference to work off of and always feeling like a failure if I didn't hit that big goal. So compartmentalize, break down, learn to
Mhm.
learn to goal set, be ambitious but reasonable with yourself.
Love that. Such a good response. And I'm gonna ask one more kind of education related question to build off the question that came in from one of our students. And, you know, Vincent, obviously academics and sport or academics and passion, it's a tough balance. You just talked about based on that question, how do you in essence keep up with everything? What do you do if you run out of time? Like everything is always time. There's so much going on. There's training, there's competition, there's health and wellness, there's the mental side of things. There's so much that goes into it. So, if you can share, were there ever any moments that you struggled with just motivation in school? I think as an athlete, it was always easier for me to want to just kind of gear more towards my sport or sports that I was playing because I just was so passionate about it. In school, I found sometimes maybe playing second fiddle where it was still important, but maybe I wasn't taking it as serious as I should. So, can you share some feedback, whether you dealt with it personally, of maybe when that lack of motivation comes in around the academic side of things, how did you overcome it? Or what advice could you give to overcome that maybe lack of motivation if that does happen?
Yeah, absolutely. All the time I felt like, what am I even learning? What am I even doing? And a couple things I would say first, I would say try to connect taking on an intellectual challenge to taking on a physical challenge. There's many ways you can apply the problem solving skills or the way you break down and tackle a challenge in your sport to doing the same with an intellectual problem. But furthermore, I would think of the two as reinforcing each other. My coach used to tell me, Vincent, you're an athlete, a scholar, and a gentleman. And and I think I start to come to realize what he means, but it's just like a well-rounded person, right? I think there's a certain scientific approach that you learn in the process of school that is actually highly applicable and will help your learning process in a sport. For me, it was okay, the scientific research process is trying to identify, in general, is trying to identify the causal impact of one variable on another while removing any false signal produced by potential, confounding variables. So for example, you're trying to identify uh, the impact of drinking soda on the hours of sleep you get every night. Okay, but then you have to uh, eliminate the other variables that could impact how much sleep you get, such as, your screen time, your physical activity during the day, your blue light exposure before bed, et cetera, right? You have to narrow down the true causal impact of soda on sleep time.
Yep.
And then how like in figure skating, I was always like, okay, what is the actual cause of this mistake I'm making, right? Because it's very easy to it's very easy for me to like isolate a single element in my head, such as a jump, right? A jump that went wrong, and I can think of all the possible things that could have gone wrong, and one by one, I try to tweak those variables and see if it has an impact on the outcome. And slowly I'm able to, work out the actual cause. Because a lot of coaches, I don't know how it is in tennis or in the sports that, that our listeners might be that might play. But in figure skating, a lot of coaches just like to attribute failure to whatever they feel like it is in the moment, whatever suits the point they want to make. And I would always have these like intellectual arguments with them. I would be like, no, it's actually because of this. And they would stop being a smartass, just go do it. And
Right.
and I was really lucky into later in my career to find a coach who would actually uh, encourage me to have those conversations and encourage me to work out
Mhm.
the true causal impact of some variables on the other. Because eventually that allowed us to have a better contingency plan to address those variables,
Mhm.
whatever could possibly go wrong going into a jump or an element. I knew how to address it. I knew the outcome it would have, and I knew how to address it. So that's one way in which I've been able to uh, apply my academic learnings to sports. The last thing I'll say on it is just like I talked about in approaching a major challenge, balancing school and your sport is a huge challenge, and you have to be able to compartmentalize and goal set reasonably for each one. So for example, when I was in high school, international competitions began picking up, and I would have to be gone for, a whole week at a time, and I had to get so far ahead on my assignments so that I could just have those weeks where I could just purely focus on skating and not do any schoolwork. And so at some points, I was an entire month ahead in my lessons, in my classes, and in my homework. And so, obviously it was really like if my mom told me like, Vincent, you have to get a month ahead right now, and it'd be like, how the heck am I supposed to do that, right? But literally it's one step at a time. Literally it's one step at a time.
Mhm.
When I get into my start post before my program starts, before my music starts, I keep on telling myself it's one element at a time. Skating the entire program perfectly seems like a huge task in my head, but I just focus on the the transition into the first element, then the transition into the next element, then the transition to the next element. Take a breath before each one, pace myself before each one. And then for school, right? It's just one objective at a time.
Mhm.
And again, be ambitious, but be reasonable for yourself. It's not reasonable to expect yourself to get a month ahead in a single day, but you can set a goal for yourself like I'm going to complete one extra lesson each day. I'm going to fulfill one extra learning objective each day. And those small steps you take will compound quicker than you expect.
I love that. Well, and I mean, kind of building off what you said, you talked about the small steps and kind of the compounding and, how much you can in essence fit in at a time or a day. And, you relate that back to what your mom said, like get a month ahead. I mean, it's no different than why we've got ICL built the way it is again, it follows kind of a college operating model. And in the sense that you may not be taking in like a traditional brick and mortar school, all your courses in one day where you're learning history and math and English and science and an elective all at the same time, you're getting a chance to carve out those times. And so, at ICL, you might just have your live seminar for math one day and your live seminar for English another day. And it's again, we realize that there's a lot going on in each of our students' lives, and it gives them a chance to compartmentalize a little bit. hone in, focus in, and really drill into what's going to allow them to take the necessary steps to be successful. So I love how you related that back. And the other piece that you brought up was that kind of, the causal impact or the root cause. And root cause is just so key because it's easy to kind of focus on the initial, oh, it was that. But when you start digging and you peel back the layers, there's quite a bit more to it. And I mean, it'd be easy for me to say I got bad sleep because my bed is old. Well, like you just talked about, it could be screen time. It could be that blue light. It could be the fact that you had a soda before. I mean, there's so many things. And so I love that that is so relatable to everything in life. There's always going to be a root cause, and it allows you to really dig in, but it's on us to maybe look intrinsically, look internally, and understand what it is that that root cause was based on that.
Right. Yeah, and furthermore, a lot of people a lot of people are complacent being reactionary to the effect, right? The effect of that root cause happens, and then we respond to the effect and we say, let's try and avoid the effect. Well, it's not, yes, we should try and avoid the effect, but we need to avoid the cause, right? And so like this is uh for example, in a jump, right? Once you leave the ice, you have not that much control over your body. You don't, it's not like you have, something to push off against. You can't generate more torque, right? Once you're in the air, it's like you just pull in and try to check yourself for the landing, right? So a lot of coaches will be like, you were off on the landing, or you weren't you were off axis in the air, or yeah, that's great. That's technically true, but there's always something that happened on the preparation or the takeoff that led to that, right? So I mean, I don't know tennis very well, but it's like after the ball leaves your racket, it's like what's done is done, right? So you could say the ball keeps on ending up there, or the ball keeps on ending up like too high, or too, or whatever. It's not placed right. And it's like, well, what's happening on my swing that I can change, right? I can't change what happens to the ball once it's already left my racket. What I can control is my swing. What I can control is my footwork going into that swing, right? So there's always going to be a cause. Focus on the cause, not on the effect.
I love that.
Identify the effect, yes, but focus on controlling what you can control, which is the cause.
Absolutely. Well, you used some of my key words, and I think we might have talked about this on the side, or maybe during the parent orientation, student orientation, and the respond versus react mentality. That's always been something that's near and dear to me because I tell everybody that I can, we have a choice. We can respond or we can react. And normally when I say that, the look I get is kind of like this, and it's like, well, it's the same thing. And so I take a step back and I say, let's think about this. A reaction typically is filled with emotion. If something happens to me or I make a mistake and I react, it's usually emotionally driven, meaning I'm not really thinking about what's about to come out of my mouth or what I'm about to do. I'm literally taking a reaction because of the fact that it's tied to what I just experienced, what I just felt. There's that emotion tied to it. And not always, but most of the time, a reaction might have a negative tie to it, a negative connotation. Whereas if I respond, whether I take a minute, an hour, a day, a week, I'm thinking through what are the appropriate steps I can take next? How do I want to proceed? How do I want to move forward? Even if I'm on the baseball field, the tennis court, I'm in an equestrian competition, or I'm just dealing with life in general, I have that opportunity to choose my path of respond versus react. And I want to make it very clear we're human beings. We're going to react sometimes. Things are going to happen in our lives where a reaction is going to happen. It doesn't always mean it has to be a bad thing, but I very much so believe in the premise of if you can respond, you're typically allowing yourself the best opportunity for success because you've kind of thought through what are those necessary steps to take moving forward.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah.
Amazing. So we had another question come in from one of our students, and the question was, how did you manage to come back after injuries and and mentally and physically prepare before big competitions?
Well, starting from square one is always very difficult, right? And I've, we've talked about goal setting, we've talked about all that, and I guess something that we haven't quite touched on is I think it's very easy to come back and feel the pressure of on day one I need to be back to my former self,
Yeah.
right? I've I've quit skating multiple times. I've been involuntarily off the ice due to injuries multiple times. And every time I come back, I feel this itch to just, you know, get back to 100% right away. And sometimes that's a recipe for more injury. If you, start doing things that your body's not ready to do, or you start putting your mind into situations that it's not ready to handle. So, I mean, this is something that takes a lot of experience, but give yourself grace. And if you can't give yourself grace, to the parents listening, I'd urge you to give your kid, be patient with your kids and be encouraging to them. Tell them when you see something they're doing that represents progress. Um, because I love my mom. She was very hard on me, and sometimes it was difficult to come back from, an injury or a setback and hear like you're not where you were. You're
Mhm.
not good enough. You're not working hard enough. And so to the parents out there, please be patient with your children when they're coming back from injuries and from setbacks. It's very difficult for them, and they just need some encouragement sometimes. And also, furthermore, I would say don't try not to compare yourself to where your competitors are at right at that moment. Just know that they'll also have setbacks from time to time. They'll be going through the exact same struggles that you are at the moment. And if you just set reasonable progress goals for yourself each week, like I'm going to focus on relearning this skill this week. I'm going to focus on relearning this skill this week. I'm going to focus on my breathing this week. I'm going to focus on how I read my opponent's movement this week, et cetera, et cetera. Right? It's like, it's the building blocks. And before you know it, those things will piece together like magic. But if you try and waggle, you know, alternating fingers and toes all at the same time and do all of it on the very first day back, obviously you're going to fail.
Yeah.
So patience, give yourself grace, goal set.
I love that. We just had a talk last week, and I was talking about something work related, but we were talking about a couple of different projects, and I related it to a pizza or a piece of pie. If you try and eat the entire pie or pizza at once, you're going to take a bite of each piece, and you're never going to actually, in essence, see progress in any of the areas because you're just not giving yourself enough grace, time, etc., to be able to be successful with what you're working on. And so, a
Yeah.
relatable question tied to that, Vincent, actually, came in from our same student, but tied to what you were just kind of talking about in the question that she had asked. And the follow-up was, how did you balance being a perfectionist with also setting reasonable but ambitious goals?
That's a I dread that question, right? Because I was always like my dreams, my goals were always so lofty that people would just chuckle at them, you know. I was 10 I was 7 years old. No, I was 8 years old watching my first world championships live, and I was like, I'm gonna be down there one day. I was 9 years old watching my first Olympics, and I was like, that's gonna be me one day. And at the time, it was just like saying it would be like me saying right now, I want to be the president of the United States, or I want to be a Nobel Peace Prize winner. It's like there's not even a foundation to do that yet. There's not even concepts of a roadmap yet.
Mhm.
Um, but uh, but it's just like I always let the crazy impossible dream uh stoke the fire in my belly, but I didn't let it, I didn't let it like intellectually I didn't use it to intellectually measure my progress, I so I intellectually and tangibly I would use more reasonable things to fuel my progress. But deep down inside, I used that crazy impossible dream to stoke that fire. So it's like you can sort of have two targets in your head. One is that crazy impossible dream, that fixed point at the end, and then the other is this moving target that stays just ahead of you. And you're going to like let yourself reach that moving target. Allow yourself to savor the small victories of catching up to it. But know that it's going to keep moving and you're going to keep working and pushing yourself to keep up with it. And but don't like obviously don't let the moving target get so far with it. You're never going to catch up with it, right? You have to let yourself reach your small goals along the way. And yeah, so it's sort of like a again, this is like compartmentalizing, right? You got the two different ways of motivating yourself there.
Totally. Well, I mean, it's to your point. You could have two parallel pathways. They're going to look a lot different, but both might be aimed at the exact same target. The way to get there is going to look and feel different, and one of them might be your, super ambitious pathway, and one of them might be the more attainable, reasonable. Doesn't mean they can't end up ultimately going towards that same area. It's just you're kind of giving yourself an opportunity to go down both paths and still finding the success along the way. So I love how you shared.
Right, right, exactly. And just being open-minded, right? Being open-minded is sometimes the key to overcoming my perfectionism because sometimes I would sense that, you know, like something's going wrong, something doesn't feel right. Oh no, like I can't do it anymore. It's all over. And my coach would always just tell me, I would be before I'd step on the ice, I would sometimes just be visibly shaken. I would tell my coach like this doesn't feel right, like, something's hurting or this feels wrong or just something feels wrong and he would always tell me that's okay. Finish the sentence. I feel this way and
Mhm.
it's still possible for me to do this, right? And
Love
he would always encourage me to keep an open mind to the possibility that things might turn out okay. And that's been so powerful. That's freed my like when that sort of false trap of the mind frees up,
Mhm.
you'll also feel your body free up to just be able to run faster, to fly higher, to work harder. And it's quite magical. It's really quite magical.
Love that. You've mentioned open-minded, multiple times. And to your point, I mean, if you're not open-minded, you can't, in essence, go down that pathway you just discussed. And everyone on this call and everybody at ICL, I constantly find myself amazed. I just mentioned before the call started, I spent 6 days out in Palm Desert, a week and a half ago, and I had the opportunity to spend some time with some of our, in this case, tennis players, because it was a tennis event at that time, and their parents and some of our, partners and things like that, and even some of the folks on this call. And I'm always walk away finding myself amazed at the caliber of our students. And their willingness to give it their all while also having that tremendous character, by also focusing on the leadership, by also focusing on all those elements. And I do see that open-mindedness in them. But to hear it from someone like yourself who's lived it, breathed it, done it, and kind of had a long, windy journey that sometimes went forward, sometimes went backwards, sometimes went sideways, to hear that open-minded perspective has allowed you to continue to, in essence, center yourself and move forward. I think that's a
Yeah.
key takeaway for our students.
Yeah, and open-mindedness is not only a critical tool to bring yourself from those moments where you feel like you can't push through back to a position of more equilibrium. It's also an extremely useful tool to push yourself beyond the boundary in the positive direction. So it can bring you from if you think of like a number line, right? From -1 to 0 to 1. It can bring you from -1 back to 0. It can also help extend the number line past 1, push it as far as you want. And the best example I have of that, I think I talked about this during the orientation, but it's like I think it should be mentioned again, is that open-mindedness and the willingness to experiment is a quality that I see in all the greats, all the people doing incredible stuff. That it's a certain mindset. It's the idea that I don't care what everyone else thinks is impossible. I'm open-minded to the possibility that I might be able to do this crazy thing. And and it's not even crazy to me because I believe that I can do it. And that's enough. Like n you don't need to validate my idea. I'm gonna go and try it. And like what's it to you, right? You're not going to incur any downside from it. Just let me believe in myself, let me experiment, let me try. And that willingness to experiment has served me so well. Back in 2015, I I tried a quadruple Lutz, which was the hardest jump at the time. Only a handful of people, less, I think 3 or 4 people in the world were trying it. It had only been done once in competition, twice in competition up to that point, and there were like 3 people at the time trying it, including myself. And like we were all just kind of trying it under wraps on our own, not really like publicly doing it. So basically, in my head, it was like, I'm doing this for myself, not because anyone else is doing it. I don't know if it's possible for anyone else. I think it's possible for me. I want to try it because why not? Why the heck not?
Yeah.
And and I succeeded. I ended up becoming the first person to land a quadruple Lutz in Olympic history. And I that the title really doesn't mean that title doesn't really mean much to me because I think the actual reason that I was the first to land it is because had an earlier starting order than other people who also did it at the same competition.
Okay.
But before the Olympics, right? Years before the Olympics, it was when it actually mattered, was when I was one of the first people trying it and doing it, and that's open-mindedness. The current top male figure skater, Ilya Malinin, I saw from day one, like years before he saw success. I was like, this kid has that willingness to experiment. I saw him posting videos of him just trying crazy stuff on the internet. And some people were like, oh, that's cool. Some people brushed it off as just like, oh, he's being a little boy. I saw that as like, I had that spark in me too. I see it in him. He's going to go on to do great things because he doesn't care what other people think is impossible. I, I've
Love that.
I've coached and mentored this skater actually in right here in Rhode Island who also has that spark, and I think he's going to go on to do great things. I see this in all the greatest generational talents in my sport, and I'm sure it exists in all the other sports too. But is this is I cannot overstate the importance, or I cannot understate the importance of open-mindedness in allowing you to push that boundary and truly become one of the greats. You can't settle for the status quo. If you want to be remembered, if you want to have legacy, if you want to if you want to be like Djokovic or Nadal, Federer, Williams, whoever your idols are, you have to be willing to break out of the status quo. You have to be willing to try things that other people think is crazy or stupid or ridiculous.
Love that.
That doesn't matter. All that matters is your belief.
I love that. I mean, again, sound bites there, just like all that matters is your belief. I mean, that's so huge because it really can be applied to everything in life, and it's just so crucial to be able to remember that. So, yet somehow this always happens with us, Vincent. When you and I talk, what is ultimately ends up being an hour feels like it's been like 20 minutes, and so we're almost getting to the top of the hour. And so, I do want two more questions came in from our students, and so I love that because I'd rather hit their questions because again, they're so relatable. Let me ask both these questions too. So first question is this. When you get out on the ice, have you ever been mentally paralyzed by that perfectionism and kind of fallen into a negative trap?
Yes, absolutely. This happened to me at the 2022 US Figure Skating Championships. I was so overwhelmed by this feeling of perfectionism. I had just set a personal record in the short program. I went out into the free skate thinking this is when I'm going to finally, this is when I'm going to finally put the perfect combination of programs together and do it. And I had never been so frozen by perfectionism in my life. I was like physically unable to move. Like I had to mentally command every single body part to move. And mind you, this was late in my career. I was ex an experienced competitor. I like by all means, I by all measures, I had done the right preparations. I was physically prepared. I was mentally prepared. but it just hit me in the moment, and there really wasn't much I could do about it. I was trying to breathe, I was trying to do all the mental exercises. It just hit me. And that'll happen, right? You will, as as a top competitor, as an athlete in any sport, you will have to face these moments, right? And it's like, what do you learn from it? And for me, it was just like the concept of being letting things be automatic versus being manual in the moment. You don't want to be manual. If you're manual, you're 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 forcing your body to your body is lagging behind. In sports, in when your body moves from point A to point B, when your posterior chain fires, when your core drives your movement, everything is automatic. You shouldn't be thinking about it. You should be letting it happen. And if I had to go back and, change how I approach that moment, or, I guess if I were to go compete again and try to do it better, I would I would really just I would really just try and let things happen. Really try and let things happen. I would stop trying to force my body to do the right thing. Because I think what happened I felt myself freezing up, and then I tried to force my body past it even more. And
Yeah,
that was just a really negative chain. That was just a really negative chain. I would just shake my limbs out and close my eyes, visualize myself back in my home rink, just mindlessly going about my daily repetitions, and just try and let that ride out. That's what I would do differently there. Yeah.
I love that. So good. That just that visualization piece in itself is just so good. All right, one final question, and then I'm going to ask you to share a little motivating statement as we wrap up. So, final question from our student. Do you have any advice for someone who's struggling to understand what it takes to be a good athlete? Figure skating isn't just about getting on the ice and doing jumps. Doing the hard work is the toughest part.
Yeah, character and mindset make the greatest athletes, not physical prowess or technical excellence in your sport. That again, we talked about greatness, legacy, what drives that, right? It's not I won a gold medal at this competition. It's not I landed a quad lutz at the Olympics. It's I through the way I carried myself through these difficulties, through the way I treated my opponents, through the way I carried myself with dignity, and as a sportsman through the toughest times in my career, I left an indelible mark on everyone around me and on the sport. And that's what legacy means. That transcends sport, that builds character through your entire life, that's applicable to your future career, your family, challenges you'll face interpersonal relationships. It doesn't matter. Character is everything, sportsmanship is everything, mindset is everything.
I love that. So amazing. Thank you for taking the time to answer that. All right. So my last question, or I guess more so statement for you is we're less than 2 months. I can't believe I'm saying that. We're less than 2 months away from our year-end celebration. And in essence, our semester ends here in the next month and a half. And so we talked about, staying motivated in school, motivated in sport, things like that. What's the motivating piece of advice, Vincent, as we wrap up our call for as our students kind of lock in? What can you tell them to keep them motivated for these final 2 months as far as they're trying to wrap up their semester goes?
I'm going to directly quote Steve Jobs and say, stay hungry, stay foolish.
Yes.
When I first heard that, I was, I think I was 10 or 11 years old. I had no idea what it meant.
Yeah.
Now I know that is everything. Stay hungry. No matter what you achieve, stay motivated to achieve more. What's next? Because the moment you get complacent is the moment that you start spiraling downwards, or the moment that stop making progress, right? So that's a stay hungry part. Stay foolish. Always be curious to learn more. Always be curious to learn more. You think you know it all? No, you don't. Life is going to throw something else at you that you have no idea how to handle. So So there's always more to accomplish. There's always more to learn. There's always more room to grow.
It's amazing. Well, let me be the first to say thank you, as always. Again, we powered through an hour, which did not feel like an hour. I don't know how that happened so fast with you, but when it's somebody like you who's charismatic, who's genuine, who's authentic, who just speaks from the heart, it's so easy to just get locked in on what you're saying, the advice you're sharing, and it means a ton not only to us at ICL, every one of our students, every one of our parents, and the great part is this advice gets to get shared with other individuals that they weren't on the call with us tonight. We have the ability to share out those sound bites and things like that. So thank you for the impact that you continue to have as a champion mentor at ICL Academy. We're excited, obviously, about your journey. You're continuing to do things, work on things. And the great thing is you're not going anywhere. You always tell us like, hey, I'll give you as much time as I can. And so we try and not tap on your shoulder too much, but we're so excited to watch your journey and continue to learn from you because you've got a tremendous future ahead of you.
I thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and I want to be here as a resource to each of you here listening. Please, please reach out and let me know any questions you have, any feedback, how I can help. I love working with young students, giving back to people, giving back to the community that helped me become a great athlete and move forward through my career. I want to pay that forward. And it just warms my heart to see all these motivated and bright and talented young students whose shoes I was once in. Um, so thank you so much for attending today, and it's absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks again, Vincent. All right, everyone. Well, that's the end of the webinar for tonight. Thank you all for joining. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks for the questions, the interactive comments. It always is helpful. So have a wonderful rest of your night, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.